I always try to go, if I can, where there's professional sports teams. I'm being serious, right? I've made the mistake of going to a small city. Like once we went to Springfield, Massachusetts, because I wanted to get away from Boston, and it was a fucking huge mistake. It was a disaster. And so we learned that even if maybe there's not necessarily a tremendous amount of cannabis being grown in that city, you want to go where there's people, right? Like, because it's a lot easier to get a 0.5% of 7 million people than it is to get a 0.5% of 150,000 people. And so sometimes that's how I think about where we're going to do trade shows. Sometimes it sucks because it's hard to get to them. Bigger cities obviously are congested with traffic. It makes it more of a headache, but you got to go where there's people.
We are back with another episode of Meet Unshackled, the conference preview shorts, as we like to call them, where you meet the men and women behind the scenes, behind the curtain of the various conferences that are the go-to conferences in cannabis in the United States and some international this year. So we are here with CannaCon 2024. How you doing?
Great. How you doing?
Can you introduce yourself to the audience?
Sure. My name is Nick Smart. I'm CEO and part owner of CannaCon since late 2013.
Wow, CannaCon's been around since 2013.
Yeah, this is technically our 10th year, but we started the idea and the process of building the company late 2013.
And I've been to a few CannaCons over the years. It's a smaller show, but those smaller shows are where you make the intimate connections and you actually have time to talk to different individuals and develop solid relationships. The big show like MJ BizCon has fantastic opportunities and there's just so much, but I like CannaCon because that's where you develop these relationships that really matter. So appreciate what you do. What's happening with CannaCon this year? Where are your shows at?
So we're in two places we've been in the past, which is Oklahoma City and New Mexico. Oklahoma's in April, New Mexico's in May. Oh, I guess three. We've been in New York in the past too, but it was right during the middle of probably their biggest COVID outbreak ever, January 2020. Really bad timing. But we're going back to New York in Rochester in June. I think we read, what was the stat? 84 to 9,500
applicants
applied for licenses, right? Which is great. So Rochester's in June, and then we've got Minnesota in August at St. Paul, and then Cleveland, Ohio in October.
Yeah, that I think there's going to be like 1,400 new licenses issued in New York, so it's going to be a tremendous amount of activity for that Rochester show, and certainly St. Paul as well, Minneapolis. Those are a good choice. I like I don't know who's on your strategic advisory board, but I like your choices. I'm also a big fan of Oklahoma City.
Yeah. Oklahoma City has been, it's probably what saved us from still having CannaCon or not during COVID. What was it? The early 2020. Are you familiar with Fern or anything like that? Like they're a large decorating company that builds all of our booths, and they're probably second largest in the country, other than right. Freeman. Freeman's, who does like MJ BizCon, a little bit bigger. Anyway, what was interesting about Oklahoma that year was that we were the only in-person trade show that Fern did the whole freaking year. So say what you want about the people of Oklahoma, but thank God that they let us do our show, because there were a lot of trade show companies that didn't make it through it because they simply were not allowed to do shows in the states that they had shows to do shows in.
What month was that in 2020?
April?
Really? Then during like the big shutdown month?
Yeah, I didn't give a shit. And I don't mean that disrespectfully. I mean,
no,
they were going to allow me to do the show. We had a contractual obligation to our exhibitors to do the show. And people hadn't been anywhere for a long time. And so, yeah, we did the show. And it worked. It was probably our second or third largest attended show that we've ever done in 30 shows.
Yeah, and we're unapologetic. You don't need a comment for CannaCon, but we're unapologetic libertarians over here at Meta. I
Okay.
always say if 50 years of cannabis prohibition didn't teach you to not trust the media, Republicans, Democrats, democracies, dictatorships, and everyone else and every other government, I don't know what's wrong with you. You know what I'm saying? So
Look, everyone has an agenda, and it's definitely not in our best interest. And if you didn't figure that out, whatever you were during this time, then you weren't listening or keeping your eyes open.
absolutely. So CannaCon, what are some of the cool things happening? I know you got some really good places to go to and really good times of the year too. Minneapolis in August, that's awesome. And
Yeah,
New
that's good.
York in June, that's beautiful. Albuquerque in May, nice temperature, nice,
Yeah,
well coordinated with the
I think
climate
we got
there.
lucky. Look, sometimes states pop. You make the first phone call, and you get a good date.
Yeah.
And it doesn't hurt that we've been doing this a long time, and we've been professional for a long time. And these guys will call other trade show convention centers that you've used in the past, and as long as you worked well with them, then it's a lot easier to get it, especially with these new states, right? Like Ohio was reluctant to let us do a cannabis show. Yes, it's legal, but a lot of the board of directors of these convention centers are old fucking dudes that have a very unfortunate view of cannabis.
Right.
And so sometimes it's tough. And so that really helps when you've done well in the past in other places, because you've been professional, because you've done it the right way. So it makes things easier sometimes. But yeah, we got lucky. Minnesota in August, I don't think I could have asked for a better date. I think the second rated city in America to live in 2023, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. I mean, Cleveland, I'm excited about that show now because I didn't click in my mind, but Ohio's a hotbed of activity as well. So that show,
Ohio's hotter than New York, I think.
yeah,
I don't
yeah.
think I could have anticipated that, right? When we decided to do both these shows. But considering that Ohio is almost 6 months after New York, and we have the exact same amount of exhibitors sold to both those shows, I think that kind of tells you that there's still some reluctance in New York, because there's been a lot of shows there in the past and they've all sucked. And it's just never been a good time. New York's had a really hard time battling the black market. I mean, they just let people pop up a fucking tent and sell weed wherever they want. And then they try to incorporate legal businesses. And I mean, how are you supposed to compete with that? Right. So that's been a really tough situation in New York. That's kind of why we've forgot about New York City and went to Rochester. Do I expect people from New York City to come? No, I don't. That's a drive, dude. Right. I expect people from Buffalo. I expect people from Syracuse. I expect people from kind of central New York to come. And then when we're talking about Ohio, when I was talking to people about New York, everyone was asking about Ohio and
Yeah.
when you're going to do Ohio, right? And so, ironically, the first idea was we were going to go to Cincinnati. Called the guys up in Cincinnati, and they don't have a convention center for the next 6 years. It's under construction. And so then the next obvious idea was to go to Cleveland. I always try to go, if I can, where there's professional sports teams. I'm being serious, right? I've made the mistake of going to a small city. Like once we went to Springfield, Massachusetts, because I wanted to get away from Boston, and it was a fucking huge mistake. It was a disaster. And so we learned that even if maybe there's not necessarily a tremendous amount of cannabis being grown in that city, you want to go where there's people, right? Like, because it's a lot easier to get 0.5% of 7 million people than it is to get 0.5% of 150,000 people. And so sometimes that's how I think about where we're going to do trade shows. Sometimes it sucks because it's hard to get to them. Bigger cities obviously are congested with traffic, and it makes it more of a headache, but you got to go where there's people. So, Cleveland is what, 3.6 million in the suburbs, in that surrounding area. But Minnesota is an interesting one. You got like 6.5 million people between St. Paul and what's the other one right there?
Minneapolis.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, you guys have definitely carved yourself out a niche. You and like one other conference as like the go-to regional conferences, which is fantastic. I don't know if you know this, but I tried to do a conference back in 2015, 16, 17. And I mean, it's kind of cool to do, but you're not making a fortune. You're bringing a lot of people together and you're doing something of tremendous value. So
Yeah.
it's got to be a labor of love for you guys. And I'm glad
There's
you got,
not a lot of profit
yeah,
but you know, I think the only amount of profit that you're really making if you're in the cannabis industry is if you're selling, right, to the consumer. Everybody else is just trying to make a living where you can support your family. And, we're able to do that. And that's enough. I mean, if you think about this, I've lowered my prices on my booths in the last 7 years. Everybody else on the fucking planet in America has raised their prices on everything, yet we've lowered them. And it's because we've had to, where we weren't going to be able to continue to sell booths. And it's the unfortunate situation that trade show companies are in. Like I said, you asked when we first started, you said, how is CannaCon doing? And I said, well, compared to when, right?
right.
Compared to 2014, we're doing great. Compared to 2021, it's not close.
Exactly. Mita has gone through the exact same thing. I was trying to explain my team, given the suffering of brands and the lowering of prices, that we have to recognize that. And, it's not a bad thing to lower your prices. You're just dealing with market realities. And 15 years from now, cannabis is going to be produced at $100 a pound and retailed at much less. And if you think you're not going to lower your prices, whether you're ancillary, auxiliary, Leafly, weed maps, conferences, trade associations, you're a fool.
I agree.
Very astute.
Right. Yeah. Agriculture is agriculture. And once we start looking at cannabis as agriculture and not calling it cannabis, then you'll realize how prices are going to go down, right? I mean, think if farmers could sell pounds of oregano, for instance, like they can weed, right? Or whatever it may be. I mean, I live in the second largest agricultural state in the country. And I don't really even think you think about cannabis when you think about agriculture. And I live in Washington. And I don't know if most people even know that we're the second largest agricultural state in the country, other than California. But we are. And we produce a little over $2 billion worth of cannabis a year. And it's dwarfed by dairy. Dairy's $3.5 billion a year in our state. Wine is 7 or 8 or 9 billion. But we talked about making money, right? We sold $2.5 billion worth of cannabis last year. Growers made 250 million.
Yeah.
It's a fucking lot there's a lot of discrepancy in that money from growing it and getting paid for it to the consumer taking it home and smoking.
Well, the tax man probably made 500 million of that.
40%.
Yeah, something like that.
So yeah, let's do the math. More, yeah, you're right. 1.3 billion.
Yeah, and then with 280 at the federal level, I mean, it's just ridiculous how much.
Yeah.
You know what? I'm excited to have a beer with you. I think we should sit down, you and I, and shoot the shit for an hour or two, because I think I can learn stuff from you. If you have time during CannaCon, I'll be out there to see you. And I'm sure that, given your knowledge and understanding of the industry, that you're probably curating a great conference, not with just your ancillary auxiliary, but also with your speakers and other events surrounding it. Anything in particular you want to talk about with how you guys do your speakers or educational sessions?
It depends on where we're going, right? For instance, let's talk about like a brand new state like Minnesota that's been very stifled in their medical community to where it was almost impossible. And then you just open it up to everybody. And now you can make a living growing cannabis. And we've always been focused on growers more than probably anything else because it starts with the grower, period. It has to start with them. And so Oklahoma, for instance, we're not going to have a speaker speak on anything about how to grow the plant. What's the point? They've been doing it there for 7 or 8 years. You're not going to teach them anything. So you have to realize where you go, where that state is at in their development in the legalization and how many years they've been doing it, and curate your speakers towards that. You still have to have speakers that want to speak on stuff, right? And so that's become more difficult over the years too. We used to have massive lists of waiting lists of people wanting to speak, and that list has shrunken over the years. But that's what we do. Like, so for instance, in Oklahoma, it's a lot more, and New Mexico too. It's a lot more about how to make your money work for you and how to better your business and how to be a successful business, more than it is how to get through the loopholes of being a cannabis business, which is more what it's going to be like in Ohio, New York, and Minnesota. A lot of people need help with that. And so for the first couple of years, we'll have a lot more people on the government side in that state speaking, because it's fucking confusing.
It is.
I mean, my God, is it confusing, right? There's so many different things you have to know and not fuck it up. And so that's the most important thing for us. Is we're a regional show. We have about 150 to 200 exhibitors per show. It is a smaller show. And the reason that we have been successful doing it that way is because we go back for 5 or 6 or 7 years and we continue to help the community and to help it grow into a mature market, and unfortunately to where they probably don't need CannaCon anymore. But what's really cool is our first show was 2014, Tacoma in Washington. And, to this day, you go and you look at facilities, you talk to people, and like everybody got their shit from CannaCon, dude, which is pretty cool.
I like how you roll, because the true purpose of any conference is to educate, to network, to create opportunity for those who are there.
Yeah.
And if you do your job well enough, then they don't need you anymore. That's such a genuine statement that you said. And that says something about how your guys' philosophy is for your show. You'll do everything that it takes to make sure that they have a good experience and they get what they want out of it, even to their own detriment, because ultimately, if you teach somebody enough, if you connect them enough, they don't need you. But let's hope that doesn't happen.
No, it will. No, it has to happen. Look, like, here's the real point.
I like the philosophy.
House and Gardens in 2015 spent $100,000 a show on their booths. They didn't give a fuck if they were selling things, if they were just keeping their name relevant. It didn't matter. It wasn't about that. It was just about being at the show. It's different now, dude. People, especially companies in the cannabis industry, and especially on a fucking election year, are not going to just give you their money. You have to show them a very valid reason for them to spend their marketing dollars at your show, because it's not new anymore. It's not exciting like it was in 2014 or 15. And so it has to work, right? And you can't just talk an exhibitor anymore into, well, yeah, you've got the entire market share, but you've got to come back just to keep your market share so someone else doesn't take it there. They don't buy that shit anymore. And so you go there, you're there for 5 or 6 or 7 years. And then the exhibitors that did really well don't need CannaCon anymore because they're just continuing those relationships behind the scenes. And that's great, because if we do our jobs well, then our exhibitors sell the stuff that they need to sell. None of our exhibitors are going there to not sell stuff. Right. And ironically enough, that's why we started CannaCon. 2013, we went to a show called Maximum Yield. You remember them?
Yep.
Yeah. Now they're our vendor. Now they take their magazine and vend at the shows, right? They did a show. They did shows for a long time. They were the biggest trade show they were probably the biggest trade show, right? Cannabis wise. But you couldn't sell it. You couldn't sell anything at the show. You couldn't talk about cannabis at all. What kind of fucking cannabis show is that? What kind? We came from the trade show industry. My dad, who owns most of CannaCon, sold hot tubs for Cal Spas for 25 years on the road as a show manager. So he understood the trade show industry, right? And it just seemed weird to us that you had all these very professional exhibitors that couldn't sell anything, that couldn't talk about cannabis. They had to pretend that you were talking about growing tomatoes. And we just thought it was really silly. So we changed all of that. And I don't know, it's worked for 10 years. And it's continuing to work. I think that that's why we're not in Washington anymore.
Yeah.
Because as I said, everybody has everything. And then you got to talk about this too. Washington, when we started this, had about 1,900 growers and about 1,900
Retailers.
processors.
Oh, processors.
No, retailers come to the show. They don't buy booths at the show.
Yeah.
We're more of a, like, we have exhibitors that sell stuff for a dispensary owner to come and buy for their shop, right?
Right. There's about 500 retail in Washington, I believe, but whatever.
82 that make money. Seriously. 82 that make over 10 grand a month. The biggest one is in a town with less than 30,000 people, and they make $1.3 billion a month. A friend of mine owns it. It's the only one within 300 miles in Eastern Washington. Ironically enough, the third largest in the state is right down the road from me. There's 15,000 people in my town.
Yeah.
So there were these 3,800 plus about 800 retailers that were all making money. Now there's 82 retailers that make over 10 grand, about 180 growers and about 100 processors that make enough money to make a living. You can't have trade shows when you have less than 400 or 500 businesses that you can draw from. And that's what happens when a market becomes mature. I think we passed 502 bill in 2012 in Washington. So what are we at? 12 years.
Yep.
Right. And we had medical cannabis passed in 1996. I was 16. I'm 44. So, it's been a long time that you could do stuff with cannabis in our state. And so when those things happen, markets become mature, you go somewhere else. Minnesota, we could probably be at for 6 to 7 years. Ohio, actually, Minnesota, that's probably, about 6 to 7 years. We were in Detroit since 2017, and this is the first year since 2017 we're not going back to Detroit. And it's just because it's time to move on to new places,
Yeah, no, that's great. And your in-depth understanding of the cannabis industry, the cannabis marketplaces, cannabis structure, the development state by state is going to help you get to the right spots. I mean, certainly this year looks really good for CannaCon. So
we got lucky, dude. Like,
yeah,
like I said, I've got a great sales manager. His name's Joe Kennedy. We've been friends 20 years. He's been with us since 2017. He is on top of what places go. And as soon as he's got an inclination of what places go, we sit and talk about it. And I get my ass on the phone and I work my magic trying to get us in before everybody else. And then you got to try to protect yourself, right? You got to do the very best you can and not let them let other trade shows that do what you do go, and advocate for yourself and explain to them. And here's the thing, you talked about having competition, and competition is fine in some respects, but in other respects it's awful. If you have a company that essentially does the same shit you do, and they have a lot of the exact same exhibitors you do, they use the exact same convention center you do, they just do it a few months apart, 3 years later no one knows the difference between the shows. I know this for a fact because a lot of people tell me that they've come or done our shows or call us and say they want their money back for a show or they weren't happy. And we're like, we didn't even do a fucking show. What are you talking about? And then it's just because it's all become so goddamn convoluted that sometimes when these smaller companies want to follow you around and act like they're you, it makes your job really hard.
Well, you guys have done a pretty good job establishing your reputation over the last 10 years. So I think you guys will be one of the regional shows, maybe even do a national or international show one day with CannaCon. Who knows? That are here to
don't let Joe hear that. He's been begging me to do Mexico for 3 years now.
Yeah.
I think the problem with national shows are, where would you do it other than Las Vegas? You know, you did a show, right? You did it for a few years.
Yeah,
you know about MJ BizCon.
Yeah.
And then you look at MJ BizCon and they were down 43% this year. 43% less exhibitors. There was only about 12,000 people that went. We're talking about 35,000 that went the year before. Maybe if Dallas goes, you know, maybe that would be a show where you could do 5, 6, 7, 800 booths. I don't know though, other than Las Vegas.
Yeah, and I think there's that natural gathering spot of Vegas for conferences.
Yeah.
You know, I always wondered why LA didn't have any bigger cannabis conferences. That never came together.
They did. Do you remember the World Cannabis Congress? Now they only do their show in New York.
Yeah, well, I went to that one in LA and it still was just.
Do you remember? I sent my marketing manager in 2016 to that show in LA. 500 exhibitors, 300 attendees in 2 days.
Yeah, it was
rough.
It wasn't memorable.
LA has so much to do. LA is so. Think about that. Justin Herbert could probably walk down LA and half the people won't know who he is. And he plays 8 games a year in that stadium. LA just has so many celebrities. They have so much to do. They have so many things that are pulling for your attention that a cannabis show ain't it, dude.
Right.
And so that's another tricky, we've tried shows in California. They don't work. They just don't work. Well, I don't know.
Interesting.
I don't know.
That's interesting. Well, we're going to find you at Oklahoma City, April 5th and 6th. And I definitely, I look forward to working with you more. Your understanding of cannabis and, oh, you're not going to be there?
I don't go to shows.
Oh,
so it's funny. You said you want to meet the guys behind the scenes. I was at every single show until 2018. And I've been to one since. I stay home with the boys and my wife goes and takes care of the shows with my sales manager and our marketing director.
Okay.
And so you'll always see Joe, Cassie, and Angela, and you never get to see me.
Well, one day you and I have to sit together and have a drink and chat about the industry for sure.
Yeah, we can definitely do that.
But what's important is that your knowledge and your expertise is curating the activity that happens at the show and the location that you guys are having the show and the speakers and the content and all that. So
yeah, it's not like it's
hard work.
It's not like it's, you throw a dart on a board and you hope it's we don't lightly just go to places. We always think they're going to work. We never intentionally do a show thinking that people aren't going to show up. But what really kind of is just the simple truth about being having a company that's a trade show is they don't always work. It's not always great. You don't always pick the right places to go.
Yeah.
And you could spend 100. I mean, I've spent $100,000 in marketing a show. And then the next year I've spent 25 grand marketing the show. And we got more people when I spent 25.
I dig you, man.
Sometimes it's just a guess. And we've even thought about changing the structure of CannaCon and making it something different. It's just so hard to change when you've done something relatively well for 10 years.
And they're going to change. All shows are going to change. Every show, even MJ BizCon will change. I mean,
you think so?
As it gets more and more accepted, there's going to be more and more cannabis out there and people are going to expect it's going to be an entirely different environment. You constantly have to bob and weave and stay on top of things. And, having CannaCon, having a leader like you is what's going to allow it to succeed. So anything I can do to help, anything my group can do to help, we have great strategic advisors that we're constantly trying to figure out what's next and where things are going. So we should stay close and in touch.
I agree.
And definitely keep chatting. So
what is this shit on is that a hacky sack?
Oh my God. You know what? You're the first person to ask. I was about to say we're out of time, but we've got the turtle.
Oh, it's a turtle, dude. I got a turtle at home, a diamondback terrapin.
That's Honu. That's my spirit animal.
Okay.
We've got the elephant for wisdom or Republican, if you want, depending on which way you want to go.
Wait,
we have Yoda.
There's a Yoda. I saw the Yoda.
Yoda for insight, and the heart. You know, it represents time, and it's interesting. The little story behind this is that there's a clock, and it's still ticking. It's a ticking watch, but it's a work of art.
I kind of figured it was a work of art. That's kind of what I thought. Yeah,
I got it in Oaxaca, Mexico. What? And the gentleman who showed it to me said, you know, it's this much money. I'm like, well, how do I change the batteries? No, I said, well, when does excuse me, I said, how do I change the batteries on the watch when it runs out? And he's like, well, you don't change the batteries on your own heart. So you don't change the batteries on this clock. And I said, well, how much longer does the clock have to tick? And he said, well, how much longer does your heart have to beat? And I was like, damn you. That's fucking art. I bought that sucker. I bought 2. I was like, that is the greatest sales pitch ever. And so now I have this thing, and I'm hoping it's not some weird Benjamin Button thing where when this thing stops ticking, my heart stops ticking. But I have no idea how long that thing's going to tick for.
No, it's probably like you're going to be in, you know, I think men are just naturally competitive, and now so you have this competition with your piece of art. Like, my fucking heart's gonna last longer than you son of a bitch. You know?
And we've got Woodstock over here because he's like the soul of Snoopy, and so Woodstock's like soul, and of course we have the dark side of the moon pyramid for a lot of reasons. But hey, we could talk all day. You and I are gonna have to get together soon. But everybody should go to CannaCon, look into it on the website. What's the website?
CannaCon.org.
CannaCon.org.
Yeah.
And boy, it's great to get to know you, man. I'm more excited about the show knowing somebody like you is. You know, it's not just some sort of like corporate experiment. This is good stuff.
There's 5 of us, dude.
I love it.
We have 5 guys. We have 2 people in our office, 2 of my sales guys. And my wife runs basically all of the non-sale stuff, and then we have our marketing director, and that's it. And she's my aunt.
I love that.
All of us, man.
It's a family business.
Yeah, it really is.
Well, you got my support, and we're gonna put our resources. Yeah, we're gonna put our resources to work to promote you guys, and we look forward to seeing your success and working with you in the future.
Thank you very much. This was really cool.
Thank you for joining
us. I never know what to expect with these because sometimes it's just a rapid amount of questions about our exhibitors, and I think that's just kind of played out. Like everyone knows about us by now.
We're just trying to put a little personal, you know, who the man.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I've been talking about my company for a long time. You know, sometimes it's just cool to get to know us.
Yeah, I appreciate meeting you. I really do. I feel good about that. There's some other groups that are a little bit too corporate. And you know, it's the mom and pop nature of this industry that excited me, and
me too.
The opportunity and the possibility. It's gone a little bit corporate.
Cannabis should never be corporate.
Things up and
terrible.
And so it's been unfortunate, but we'll see what happens in the future.
I do not like how cannabis has become a corporate thing. I don't like publicly traded cannabis companies. I think it should have stayed mom and pop. Obviously, that wasn't.
You know, David.
Cards, but.
Yeah, it's hard. You know, everybody's buying into this licensing cap stuff. David is here with Mita as well. So, but we will catch you soon, and call me anytime. You got my cell phone number, and we will be in touch. And we will see volleyball, folks.
Really? That's a 100-plus-year-old sport? Holy shit. Really didn't know that. That's wild.
We will see you folks at CannaCon, and we'll continue this conversation soon.
Thank you very much, guys.